Cop pulls gun at black woman, laughs at her FBI badge. 2 minutes later, he's in cuffs. Welcome to our channel, where we dive into gripping stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat from beginning to end. Today, we unravel a tale that begins with a routine traffic stop, but quickly spirals into a whirlwind of tension, danger, and unexpected revelations. In a small town brimming with secrets, a seemingly ordinary moment sets off an extraordinary chain of events that no one could have predicted. Join us as we follow a dedicated FBI agent whose identity is challenged by a local cop with dangerous prejudices, and see how, in a matter of moments, their confrontation shifts from intimidation to comeuppance in the most startling way. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Simone Walters pressed the accelerator of her black Ford Explorer slightly, making sure not to exceed the speed limit as she headed toward the outskirts of Grayfield, a sleepy, Midwestern town that seemed to exist in a pocket of time far removed from the rush of city life. The place had been described as the kind of town you pass on your way to someplace more important, yet Simone was drawn here by an urgent mission that demanded secrecy and precision. She was an FBI special agent, known among her peers for a razor-sharp mind and an unbreakable code of ethics. While she usually operated under the radar, circumstances had forced her to take a more direct approach on this assignment. She needed to gather evidence about a possible bribery ring involving local authorities, and it required painstakingly careful steps. As she navigated the 2-lane road that sliced through acres of farmland, she replayed the details of her briefing in her mind. Grayfield's police department had been flagged for potential corruption, with mounting complaints of abuse of power and suspicious financial dealings. The FBI had tried sending in plainclothes investigators, but each had run into technical errors or was conveniently threatened with unsubstantiated charges by local officers. Simone, having grown up in a tough neighborhood and climbed her way through the ranks, possessed the grit needed to face such intimidation tactics. Still, she sensed a knot in her stomach, a silent warning that trouble was closer than she realized. The shimmering heat from the afternoon sun created mirages on the road's surface, offering a surreal stage for what was about to unfold. Grayfield's biggest landmark was its towering water tower, emblazoned with the town's name in chipped white paint. A smattering of red brick buildings lined its main street, while an older diner called Flo's Kitchen was rumored to serve the best hash browns in 3 counties. Simone had spent the last few days in a nondescript motel on the edge of town, blending in as a traveling insurance adjuster. She carried a plausible alias, complete with documentation to thwart casual curiosity. Yet, beneath her baggy sweatshirt, pressed slacks, and unassuming manner was a loaded Sig Sauer pistol and a badge that read Federal Bureau of Investigation. As she turned onto a remote county road that led to a local salvage yard, her next stop for a lead, she noticed a Dodge Charger with the Grayfield Police Department insignia parked on the shoulder. The officer behind the wheel seemed alert. His silhouette leaned forward as her SUV came into view. Instinct tensed her muscles. After years in law enforcement, she could sense when someone was watching her with more than casual interest. Sure enough, the Dodge Charger pulled out in a hurry, falling in behind her. She checked her speedometer, 42 miles per hour in a 45 zone. No reason to be stopped. Still, her pulse quickened. Something told her this wouldn't be a simple wave-and-go scenario. Officer Travis O'Connor was known around Grayfield for his aggressive tactics. According to the research Simone had gathered, multiple local residents had lodged complaints against him for excessive force. None of those complaints had gone anywhere buried in paperwork or dismissed by a complicit internal affairs process. The tall, broad-shouldered officer relished the lack of oversight, driving the roads of Greyfield as if he owned them. He routinely found ways to harass out-of-towners, especially when they fit a particular demographic that provoked his prejudice. More than once, rumors floated around that O'Connor had boasted about teaching outsiders a lesson. Simone felt the churn of dread in her gut when she noticed the charger's lights abruptly flare to life. Red and blue beams danced across her rearview mirror. She had not committed a moving violation as far as she knew. Her registration and insurance were in perfect order, though both were under her alias. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel and signaled to pull over, easing the Explorer onto a patch of gravel by the roadside. She inhaled deeply, reminding herself she was an FBI agent, fully authorized, fully trained, and fully capable. The question was, would Officer O'Connor care? The moment Simone rolled down her window, she caught the unmistakable look of hostility in O'Connor's cold blue eyes. He approached with an air of swagger, one hand on his holster while the other hovered near his radio. The late afternoon sun glinted off his aviator sunglasses, revealing only her own tense reflection in the mirrored lenses. Without the courtesy of a greeting, he demanded her license and registration. His tone was clipped, almost mocking. Simone complied, her movements deliberate to avoid any sudden gesture. She kept her voice calm, though her heart beat in her ears. "I'm sure I wasn't speeding, officer. May I ask what this stop is about?" O'Connor let out a humorless chuckle. "You out-of-towners. Always so sure you're following the rules." He removed his sunglasses, revealing an intense stare that seemed to size her up with suspicion. "Your tags look suspicious. Mind telling me why you're driving around this part of town?" The question was a loaded one. Simone handed over her documents, trying to maintain a veneer of politeness. "I'm an insurance adjuster. I've got an appointment at the salvage yard." Officer O'Connor flipped through her paperwork, nodding slowly. "Well, these out-of-state plates can be magnets for trouble. I suggest you watch yourself." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of cicadas in the tall grass. O'Connor looked over her documents in exaggerated slowness, as though expecting them to be forgeries. He let out an exasperated breath. "Step out of the vehicle," he said abruptly. Simone's mind raced. She hadn't done anything wrong. "Is there a reason you want me to step out, officer? I'd feel more comfortable if we resolved this from here." He smirked, one hand inching toward his sidearm. "Are you resisting, ma'am? I'd be careful. People who argue with me don't always like how things turn out." She'd read about this officer's pattern accusations of bullying and intimidation. Still, the direct threat jolted her senses. She slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, reminding herself that no matter how dangerous this officer might be, she had the law on her side. Once her door was open, the scorching summer heat enveloped her. Standing on the gravel shoulder, she could practically see the tension in O'Connor's posture, a coil ready to strike. With every passing second, the confrontation simmered dangerously. She took one step out, her eyes locked on him. "I'm not resisting, I just want to understand why I'm being stopped." O'Connor's gaze flickered downward, as if searching for an excuse to escalate. "Let's just say you fit the profile of someone we've been looking for." Simone felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. The phrase "fit the profile" was often coded language, especially in a department rumored to be rife with discrimination. This was exactly the kind of situation that lit a fire in her soul, a petty tyrant behind a badge, abusing the power entrusted to him. She had two priorities now: to stay safe and to gather evidence in a manner that could withstand scrutiny in court. Swiftly, she decided to see if there was any way to de-escalate. "Officer, the first respect your position. If there's a legitimate concern, I'm happy to clear it up. She paused, weighing whether to reveal her federal credentials. Although she was undercover, in life-threatening moments, her real authority took precedence. O'Connor's gaze hardened. He pointed toward the front of her SUV. "Stand over there. Keep your hands where I can see them." Simone did as instructed. Gravel crunched under her heels as she moved to the spot he'd indicated. She kept her hands in plain sight, her mind parsing potential scenarios. Would he try to search her vehicle without probable cause? Would he physically assault her if she resisted the search? As she considered these possibilities, she felt the adrenaline spike in her veins. With unsettling calm, O'Connor reached for his radio, presumably to call in the plates. "Dispatch," he said. "This is Officer O'Connor out on County Road 17, running a stop for a suspicious female driver with out-of-state tags." For a moment, static crackled over the radio. Then a flat voice responded with routine procedure. While dispatch confirmed the vehicle information, O'Connor circled the SUV, peering through the windows. Simone noticed his shoulders stiffen when his eyes locked on something. She quickly realized he was staring at her black leather portfolio case on the passenger seat, a case that not only held her official FBI identification, but also some sensitive notes about the ongoing corruption investigation. That alone wouldn't expose her mission, but the presence of a federal badge might ignite a dangerous reaction if he suspected she was investigating his department. Her pulse hammered. She had to remain composed. If she panicked, that would only embolden him. O'Connor strolled back toward her, a smug grin stretching across his face. "What's in that fancy case you got there?" Her words came out measured even. "Work documents. I'm an insurance adjuster, remember?" He narrowed his eyes. "You wouldn't mind if I take a look, would you? Maybe you've got contraband." At this, Simone made her choice. She couldn't allow him to rummage through her confidential files. "Officer, I'm afraid I can't let you do that without probable cause. If you want to look through my personal effects, I have to inform you I'm a federal officer. I'm with the FBI." The transformation on O'Connor's face was immediate. Rather than shock or concern, he broke out into a dismissive laugh that echoed across the deserted stretch of road. "FBI? You? Let me guess. You bought that badge at a yard sale. Where's your big black SUV with tinted windows and men in suits? Am I supposed to believe you just happened to be investigating something in Greyfield?" His tone dripped with sarcasm, as if the very idea of a black woman serving in federal law enforcement was a comedic impossibility. Simone tightened her jaw. This was worse than she'd anticipated. Usually, once she identified herself, local officers would at least pause, aware of the consequences of hindering a federal agent. But O'Connor seemed energized by her revelation, as though it fueled the fire of his prejudice. She forced her voice to remain steady. "Officer O'Connor, I'm advising you to reconsider your approach. You are interfering with a federal investigation," he scoffed. "Let me see that badge then." I could use a good laugh. With careful, deliberate movements, Simone reached into the side pocket of her slacks, retrieving a slim leather wallet that bore the emblem of the FBI. She flipped it open so he could see the identification clearly. His eyes scanned it for a moment, then he burst into a grin of disbelief. "That's the worst fake I've ever seen." He raised his voice in a mock official tone. "Oh, watch out, everyone! We've got the FBI in Greyfield." What happened next felt like a slow-motion nightmare. In a single fluid motion, O'Connor pulled his service firearm from its holster and aimed it right at Simone's chest. The muzzle hovered inches from her, and her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might burst through her ribcage. Fear clenched her throat, but her training demanded she stay calm. Still, nothing in her years at the academy truly prepared her for staring down the barrel of a gun pointed by a fellow law enforcement officer. And certainly not like this, on an empty stretch of road where no one would witness what might happen next. O'Connor's voice trembled with adrenaline. She couldn't tell if it was excitement or rage. "Put your hands up. On your knees." Spittle flew from his mouth, and his face contorted into something monstrous. Simone slowly raised her arms, her mind racing with possibilities. If she tried to reach for her own gun, he could shoot her before she even unlatched the holster. If she complied, she risked being handcuffed, possibly assaulted. In all her training, the cardinal rule was to de-escalate first, if it was possible, without risking her life. She chose to comply for the moment, carefully lowering herself onto the gravel. The sun beat down fiercely, and her knees scraped against the rough surface, but it was the least of her worries. O'Connor swaggered forward, looming over her with a sneer. "If you're really FBI, then I'm the President of the United States," he taunted, pressing the gun forward as though to dare her to move. She could see a faint tremor in his hands. He was excited. This man thrived on control. She locked her eyes on the horizon, trying to calm her breathing. For a fraction of a second, she thought about how quickly life could change. Minutes ago, she was on her way to follow a lead, and now she was at gunpoint. It enraged and frightened her in equal measure. The scorching wind carried the smell of hot asphalt and dust, while the distant sound of a tractor in a nearby field provided an eerie soundtrack to this ordeal. Just then, O'Connor braced his radio against his shoulder. "Dispatch, I have a suspect resisting arrest. Might need backup." His voice was thick with self-importance. Simone felt a spike of anger. He was fabricating a narrative, a common tactic used to justify escalating force. She remained perfectly still, resisting arrest in no way whatsoever. But she knew that in too many cases this was how false reports were born, turning the victim of police misconduct into the aggressor. Raising her voice so that Dispatch might hear her words, Simone spoke clearly. "Officer, I've told you, I'm a federal agent. I have not resisted arrest. I am unarmed and complying." He leaned down, lowering his face toward her until she could see every bead of sweat on his brow. "I told you to be quiet," he growled, then grabbed her by the arm. The muzzle of his gun stayed dangerously close to her face. She braced herself against the wave of terror that threatened to overwhelm her, but she would not give him the satisfaction of trembling. Inside, her mind churned through the next steps. She needed a witness, someone to see this unfolding. She also needed backup, real backup, not the local officers likely in O'Connor's pocket. And she needed to ensure her own safety while preserving the truth of these events. Then, a stroke of insight, her phone was in her pocket. If she could discreetly activate the audio recording, she'd have proof. Gritting her teeth, Simone angled her head so that O'Connor's attention remained on her face. "I'm not resisting," she repeated in a calm voice, as if she were giving a lecture at Quantico. Slowly she maneuvered her free hand and tapped twice at the side of her phone, initiating a recording app she had installed for precisely such unpredictable confrontations. She could only hope he wouldn't notice. A deafening hush settled on the road, interrupted only by O'Connor's heavy breathing and the cicadas' relentless song. Then, headlights appeared in the distance. At first, Simone thought it might be local backup or a passerby. Her heart pounded faster. Whoever it was, she prayed they could put an end to this madness. The vehicle drew closer, revealing itself as a white Jeep Wrangler with off-road tires. It skidded to a stop a few yards behind O'Connor's Charger. "Hey man, what's going on here?" came a voice from the Jeep. Out stepped a lanky figure in jeans and a T-shirt clearly not law enforcement. From the anxious set of his shoulders, Simone guessed he was a concerned civilian. He shielded his eyes from the sun and slowly moved toward the scene. The stranger's mere presence felt like a miracle to her, the possibility of a witness shining like a beacon of hope. O'Connor whipped his head around, gun still aimed at Simone. "Back off, this is police business. Leave before you get yourself in trouble." The man, younger than Simone at first thought, raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm just trying to see if everything's okay. I saw you pointing a gun at that lady." Unfazed by the tension, or perhaps empowered by the chance to display authority, O'Connor shouted, "I said leave, now!" Simone dared not move, but she locked eyes with the newcomer, silently pleading for him to call 911 or somehow get real help. The young man seemed torn. He glanced at Simone, who was still on her knees, then back at O'Connor's outstretched weapon. "I don't want any trouble, officer. It's just..." That woman looked scared. Simone took the chance. "Please call for help," she said softly. O'Connor reacted in a flash, pivoting to point the gun at the bystander. "You do that, and I'll have you arrested for interfering with police duties." But in that moment, a more critical intervention occurred. Another set of lights flooded the roadway this time from a sleek, black Chevrolet Suburban. Simone's breath caught. She recognized the vehicle. It was the standard government-issue SUV often used by federal or state law enforcement. Was it her colleagues? Had someone from the local FBI field office tracked her location? The Suburban screeched to a halt, and out stepped a tall figure wearing a dark suit and tinted sunglasses. For a brief moment, O'Connor's grip on his gun loosened. Simone seized the opportunity to stand. Every muscle in her legs felt shaky, but she forced herself to appear composed. The man from the Suburban approached swiftly, flipping open a badge wallet that glinted with a golden shield. "My name is Agent Roberto Sandoval, FBI," he announced in a commanding tone that carried an air of unyielding authority. "Officer, put your weapon down." Simone had worked with Agent Sandoval before. He was a seasoned investigator with a reputation for fairness and an unwavering dedication to the Bureau's mission. She felt an overwhelming rush of relief at his presence, tempered by the knowledge that O'Connor might not go quietly. The corrupt officer's eyes darted between Sandoval, Simone, and the bystander who was now half hidden behind his jeep. Tension hung in the air like the crackle before a thunderstorm. For a split second, O'Connor seemed to consider an all-out confrontation. His lips curled back in a snarl, and Simone could almost see the wheels turning in his mind, calculating how far he could push this. Then, a sly grin replaced his anger. He lowered his gun, albeit grudgingly, but refused to holster it. "FBI, huh?" he sneered. "This place is swarming with wannabe feds today. So what's your move, big shot?" Agent Sandoval didn't flinch. "My move is to ensure the safety of my colleague and to investigate why you have a law-abiding FBI agent at gunpoint." He gestured for Simone to come closer. She moved gingerly, hyper-aware that O'Connor's finger was still on the trigger. Her heart hammered as she stepped beside Sandoval, who positioned himself protectively in front of her. "You're interfering with police procedure," O'Connor spat, shifting on his feet. "Don't you have to notify the local PD when you're in town, or do you feds just show up wherever you like?" Sandoval glared. "We have every right to be here, officer. Now holster your weapon." At that moment, the radio on O'Connor's shoulder crackled, summoning him back to reality. A curt voice from dispatch announced that there was no record of Simone's plates being involved in any wrongdoing, nor any outstanding warrants. The timing was impeccable, as if the universe itself was stepping in to reveal the truth. Simone watched the flicker of uncertainty flash across O'Connor's face. If he continued to escalate, he would lose every shred of credibility and possibly his freedom if federal authorities decided to press charges. But in an unexpected twist, O'Connor began to laugh again, a harsh cackle echoing down the empty road. "You FBI types think you can just blow into my town and run the show. Well, I've got news for you." His eyes flicked to Simone. "Badge or no badge, you're not welcome here." Sandoval exhaled, obviously losing patience. "We'll see about that. Officer, I'm placing you under official notice that you're interfering with federal business. If you don't stand down, I will place you under arrest." "Arrest?" O'Connor spat in disbelief, feigning amusement. "You're not arresting me for doing my job." But that was precisely what Sandoval intended. He calmly reached behind his back and produced a set of handcuffs. "Officer Travis O'Connor, you have the right to remain silent." In that charged instant, Simone saw the officer's mouth twist into an angry snarl. His face went beet red. She braced for another outburst, possibly even a shot fired. The next 2 minutes would decide everything. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The summer heat pressed down like a suffocating blanket, and the only sounds were the gentle rumble of the Jeep's engine and the crackling static from O'Connor's radio. Then O'Connor made a wild gamble. He raised his service weapon again, pointing it at Sandoval now. Simone's heart lurched. If O'Connor fired, the situation would spiral out of control instantly. "Back off," he bellowed. "I swear I'll—" He never finished that sentence. Simone lunged forward in a fluid, practiced motion, pivoting her body to knock the gun to the side, just as Sandoval surged in to lock O'Connor's arm. Together, they forced the weapon from his grasp. The pistol clattered onto the pavement, its metallic ring echoing in the heavy air. O'Connor twisted violently, trying to break free, but Simone had him pinned at the shoulder. Sandoval managed to force O'Connor's right arm behind him, snapping the handcuffs in place. "You can't do this!" O'Connor roared, rage distorting his features. "This is my town!" "I'm the police." Agent Sandoval tightened the cuffs, ensuring he couldn't slip free. "Not anymore," he said gravely. The bystander from the Jeep stared wide-eyed, phone in hand, apparently filming the entire encounter. Simone let out a shaky exhale, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a tidal wave. She glanced at O'Connor on his knees, thrashing futilely under the weight of his own misdeeds. Her eyes met Sandoval's in a silent exchange. They had a potential bombshell of a case against local law enforcement now. The shift in power was almost tangible. O'Connor went from swaggering tyrant to detainee in a matter of seconds. The young bystander approached, lowering his phone. He seemed torn between relief and shock. "Are you guys okay? That was crazy." Simone wiped sweat from her brow. "We'll be fine. You did the right thing by stopping and checking on us," she said, meaning every word. Had he not shown up when he did, who knew how much farther O'Connor would have gone before Agent Sandoval arrived? Agent Sandoval pressed his earpiece to contact the local FBI field office. "This is Agent Sandoval. We need local PD backup and forensics on County Road 17. Send a black and white with a senior officer. We have an arrest of a Greyfield police officer for assault and obstruction of federal duty." He brandished a firearm at a federal agent. A crackling voice confirmed receipt. Simone found her breath easing, knowing more help was on the way. She rubbed her sore knees where the gravel had dug in. O'Connor continued to hurl curses at them, but the veneer of authority was gone. The real question now was whether the rest of the Greyfield Police Department would back him, or if they'd understand that he'd gone too far. Within minutes, a Greyfield PD cruiser arrived, lights flashing. The officer stepping out was a lanky man in his 50s, nameplate reading Sergeant Mulligan. At first, he wore a perplexed look, as though he'd stumbled onto a film set. Then, seeing O'Connor cuffed on the ground, he bristled. "What's going on here?" Agent Sandoval introduced himself calmly, explaining the situation in clipped, official tones. "Sergeant Mulligan, we have probable cause to arrest Officer O'Connor." He aimed a loaded weapon at Special Agent Simone Walters of the FBI, refused lawful commands, and obstructed our investigation. Mulligan's eyes darted between the subdued O'Connor and Simone. His jaw tightened, but he didn't immediately side with his colleague. In fact, relief flickered in his features, as though he'd long suspected O'Connor might bring trouble upon the department. "I see. Let me call the chief. This is above my pay grade." Sandoval nodded, stepping aside so Mulligan could radio his superior. Meanwhile, Simone crouched near O'Connor, who was no longer thrashing, just glaring at her with unbridled hatred. "You think you're going to get away with this?" he spat. "I have friends in this department." Simone met his gaze without flinching. "Those friends won't save you when the evidence comes out. You threatened a federal agent with lethal force. That's a felony. And I've got a recording." She tapped her phone, still capturing audio. His face paled. For the first time, he seemed to grasp the severity of his predicament. The karmic tide had turned, and nothing would stem its flood. Over the next hour, the roadside scene became a flurry of official activity. Another FBI vehicle arrived, carrying 2 more agents. They meticulously gathered statements, took photos of the scuffed gravel where Simone had knelt, and bagged O'Connor's service weapon as evidence. Local drivers slowed to stare at the spectacle, uncertain whether to rubberneck or flee. Sergeant Mulligan relayed messages from Greyfield's police chief, who apparently was at an out-of-town conference and would return as soon as possible. In the meantime, Mulligan appeared to cooperate with the federal agents, if a bit anxiously. For Simone, the swirl of voices and crackling radios felt both exhausting and oddly triumphant. As humiliating and terrifying as it had been, O'Connor's assault had inadvertently handed her the smoking gun she needed to expose the corruption in Greyfield's PD. She had more than enough to launch a full-fledged internal review. Yet, a small voice in her head warned her that they weren't out of danger. If O'Connor had allies within the department, they might try to sabotage the investigation. The risk was far from over. Still, there was an air of vindication in seeing O'Connor placed in the back seat of his own squad car, cuffed, disarmed, and fuming. When they read him his rights, Simone caught his eyes flickering with something like fear. Over the years, he had leaned on his badge to protect him from repercussions. Now, that same badge was part of the evidence against him. The weight of karma pressed down heavily, and it was only the beginning. One of the newly arrived FBI agents, a stout man named Agent Monroe, approached Simone with a respectful nod. "Agent Walters, we've secured the scene. Are you all right?" His voice carried genuine concern. Simone flexed her shoulders, tension oozing from her muscles. "I'll be fine. Might have a few bruises, but I'm okay." She looked around at the chaotic scene. "I never expected it to escalate this fast." Agent Monroe nodded, handing her a bottle of water. "I reviewed the dispatch. Sounds like you made a quick decision in a high-risk moment. You did well, kept your cool." She took a grateful gulp, letting the water soothe her parched throat. "I appreciate that. We need to keep a tight chain of evidence on everything, especially my phone recording." She pulled up the file on her device, handing it to him so it could be uploaded securely as part of the case file. "O'Connor threatened me, brandished a firearm, and refused to acknowledge my federal badge. He's also on audio making statements that could imply racial bias." Monroe's lips pressed into a thin line. "There's a big case brewing here, no doubt." He paused, scanning the group of uniformed officers, each wearing the same Greyfield patch on their shoulders. "We'll need to keep an eye out for pushback. If O'Connor's got cronies, they might not hesitate to obstruct." For the remainder of that afternoon, Simone was debriefed on the events by her FBI colleagues and asked to provide a thorough statement for both the Bureau's internal records and the eventual criminal proceedings. The local news media caught wind of an incident involving an FBI agent and a Greyfield police officer, though the details were initially hazy. Simone suspected it wouldn't stay hazy for long. Word would travel fast, and the entire department might close ranks to protect their own. She recalled the bystander in the jeep who had bravely confronted O'Connor despite the danger. She approached him when things calmed down, discovering his name was Jermaine Garrett, a local college student on break. He was shaken but determined to stand by what he saw. "I got the whole thing on video if you need it," he said. "It was pretty terrifying to watch a cop pull a gun like that." Simone assured him that his footage would be crucial. "Thank you for stepping in. You probably saved me a bullet," she said sincerely. Jermaine's face reddened, unsure how to respond to the gravity of her words. Eventually, he just nodded, promising to send the video file to her official bureau email. Night fell by the time the FBI finally secured everything they needed from the roadside. O'Connor had been transported to a nearby holding cell, ironically, one managed by the same sheriff's office he often looked down upon. The salvage yard meeting that Simone had planned was obviously derailed. She quietly hoped this ordeal hadn't compromised her overall investigation into corruption. But given O'Connor's immediate meltdown, it seemed she was onto something bigger than a single bad cop. Early the next morning, Simone woke in her motel room to the shrill ring of her cell phone. She grabbed it, blinking away the remnants of a restless sleep. Agent Sandoval was on the other end. "Morning, Simone. I'm outside your motel. Thought we could debrief over coffee. You up?" She glanced at the clock. 6:15 am. "Yeah, sure. Give me a few." She quickly washed up, changed into a fresh blouse and slacks, and grabbed her go-bag. Outside, Sandoval waited beside a dark blue sedan. His expression was a mixture of relief and lingering tension. Together, they drove to a nearby Dunkin' Donuts, a staple she relied on for strong coffee when traveling for work. Once settled at a corner booth, with steaming cups in front of them, Sandoval spoke in a hushed tone. "We've put O'Connor on indefinite suspension, pending charges of assault, brandishing a firearm, and interfering with federal operations. But it's bigger than that," he added, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were copies of financial statements, questionable bank transfers, and a list of phone logs. "We suspect O'Connor may have been receiving regular payments from an unknown source. He might have been more than just a bully with a badge. He could be directly tied to corruption in Greyfield." Simone's jaw clenched. "That means we're likely dealing with a network, maybe higher-ups in the police department, or local government officials." Sandoval nodded, tapping a photograph clipped to the folder. It showed a local businessman named Irving McClure, rumored to have a stranglehold on Greyfield's building contracts. "We've had our eyes on McClure for a while. Word is he pays people off. If O'Connor was one of them, there could be more. We're going to need airtight intel." Simone took a long sip of coffee, letting the information sink in. "So, the ambush on me might not have been random. He could have recognized me from somewhere, or he was trying to intimidate me off McClure's trail." Sandoval shrugged. "Maybe. Or it could simply be that he's an arrogant jerk who thought he could push around a so-called outsider. Either way, we can use this to our advantage. If we offer O'Connor a deal, he might flip on his handlers." She mulled that over. "That's risky. He seems like the type who'd rather go down in flames than cooperate, but it's worth a shot." They spent the next hour strategizing. With O'Connor in custody, Simone's cover as an insurance adjuster was effectively blown. The priority now was collecting enough evidence to secure indictments against anyone else in the corrupt ring. This would require going up the chain of command, carefully and methodically. The road ahead promised to be fraught with danger if O'Connor was any indication. These people wouldn't hesitate to resort to violence to protect their secrets. Finally, Sandoval stood, gathering his papers. "We have a meeting at 9:00 am with the U.S. Attorney. They're keen on pressing charges for civil rights violations too. That gives us more leverage. Let's head over." Outside, the morning sun bathed Greyfield's modest streets in golden light, as if the town were just another peaceful, unremarkable place. Yet Simone knew that beneath the quaint veneer, a battle for justice was brewing, and she would be right in the thick of it. The meeting at the U.S. Attorney's makeshift office, a renovated Victorian house on Main Street, felt like a crash course in how many skeletons Greyfield might have. The U.S. Attorney, Linda Holland, was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who wasted no time dissecting the evidence. Her seriousness was palpable as she spoke to Simone, Sandoval, and a small group of federal investigators. "All right," she began, flipping through case files. "We have probable cause for multiple charges against Officer O'Connor, his racist threats and pulling a firearm on a federal agent. Well, let's just say he's in a heap of trouble, but that's not enough. We need the people behind him. We need the puppet masters, not just the puppets." Simone nodded. "O'Connor is the tip of the iceberg. We suspect payoffs to officers. We suspect a local businessman, Irving McClure, might be funneling money to keep the police off his back." Holland leaned forward. "McClure, name's come up before. If we can connect him to O'Connor's finances, that's an immediate federal case, bribery of local officials. We'll also want to look at the police chief and possibly the mayor. Greyfield's leadership has been suspiciously cozy for a while. The plan was hatched. They'd attempt to put pressure on O'Connor in an interrogation. If he flipped, they'd get the next link in the chain. If not, they'd have to build the case by infiltrating McClure's business dealings. It was delicate work, but Simone was used to that. The bigger question was, could they do it without tipping off the entire department or endangering themselves further? Shortly after noon, Simone found herself in the stark, windowless interrogation room at the county jail where O'Connor was being held. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, giving the scene a low-budget horror movie aesthetic. The guard outside nodded respectfully to her and Sandoval as they entered. O'Connor sat at a metal table, hands cuffed in front of him, his eyes dull with exhaustion. Gone was the arrogant smirk, replaced by the guarded resentment of a trapped animal. Sandoval took the lead. "Officer O'Connor, you're looking at multiple federal charges, assault on a federal officer, civil rights violations, and possibly conspiracy if we can connect you to illegal payoffs." He leaned on the table, his tone businesslike. "Your best move right now is to cooperate. Tell us who's been paying you, and we might talk plea deal." O'Connor jutted his chin out, stubborn as ever. "I don't know what you're talking about. No one's paying me. I've always done my job by the book." Simone watched him closely. She couldn't forget how only yesterday this man had pointed a gun at her, mocking her credentials. "You pulled a firearm on me with no justification. That's not by the book." He shrugged, refusing to meet her gaze. "You were suspicious, driving around town with fake plates." Sandoval spread out printed bank statements. "Let's skip the part where you pretend innocence. We have your statements, showing unexplained deposits every month, around the same time. Where are these funds coming from?" For a moment, O'Connor's face flashed with surprise. Then he masked it with forced bravado. "That's none of your business." Simone stepped in, her tone gentle but firm. "Travis, look, whatever you've done, there's a bigger story here. You can't protect the people who paid you. They won't lift a finger to save you now. You think they care if you rot in a federal prison? Because that's where you're headed, unless you talk." He shifted in his chair, cuff chains rattling, his eyes flickered with doubt. "You're bluffing. There's no case. Nobody's going to believe your word over mine." Sandoval slid a small audio recorder across the table. "We have the entire incident on tape, from the moment you pulled your gun to the moment you threatened her life, plus eyewitness video from a local resident. And that's just the beginning." Silence thickened in the room. Finally, O'Connor blew out a harsh breath. "Let me talk to my lawyer," he snapped. It wasn't a refusal to cooperate, exactly, but it indicated he wasn't going to roll over easily. The tension in the interrogation room was suffocating, and Simone felt a surge of frustration. O'Connor had them in a holding pattern. If he wanted to drag this out, it could take weeks' time that might let the corruption ring cover its tracks. Before leaving, Simone locked eyes with O'Connor. "Last chance for now," she said, voice low. "We know you're involved in something bigger. If you keep quiet, the only person getting hurt here is you." He said nothing, but she noted the slight tremor in his jaw, fear, seeds of doubt. That was something, at least. After stepping outside the interrogation room, Simone turned to Sandoval. "He won't talk yet," she murmured, her voice echoing in the sterile hallway. "We'll need a different angle." Sandoval nodded. "We'll review phone logs, see if we can track the deposit sources. Build a bigger net. If we find a direct link to McClure or other officials, we can corner him again." Simone sighed, checking the time on her phone. She still had the original lead about the salvage yard manager who'd hinted at crooked dealings among Greyfield officers. But now, every plan was complicated by the fact that her cover was compromised. She couldn't just show up wearing a disguise and hope to pass as an insurance adjuster. The entire police department likely knew about the confrontation. "We'll have to be strategic," she concluded. As they walked through the jail's secured corridors, they passed a pair of uniformed officers whispering. Their hushed conversation died immediately when Simone and Sandoval approached. The sideways glances and tense posture told her everything they knew about O'Connor's arrest, and they didn't like it one bit. The spectre of retaliation loomed large. Once in the parking lot, Sandoval's phone buzzed. He answered, then shot Simone a meaningful look. "We've got a lead," he said, covering the phone's mouthpiece. "It's about McClure. Apparently he's hosting some kind of private event tonight. Could be a good chance to see who else is in his circle." Simone's heart quickened. "Then we should be there. Let's see how the puppet strings connect." By evening, Simone found herself standing outside the ornate gates of the McClure estate, an expansive property that seemed out of place in sleepy Greyfield. The driveway was lined with manicured hedges and glowing lanterns. The main house loomed in the distance, a lavish, pale stone mansion that spoke of old money or cunning corruption or both. Under normal circumstances, Simone might have gone undercover, but given the confrontation with O'Connor, that risked immediate recognition. Instead, she wore a modest black cocktail dress and carried a small clutch with her FBI badge tucked inside. She and Sandoval had parked in a discreet location, then approached on foot to gauge security. A uniformed private guard stood at the gate, checking invitations against a clipboard. Sandoval adjusted his tie. "Ready for Plan B," he whispered. Simone nodded, taking a steadying breath. "Yeah. Let's see if we can talk our way in. If we can't, we'll have to improvise." She stepped forward, flashing a confident smile at the guard. "Hi there. We're late, but we're friends of Mr. McClure," she said breezily. The guard squinted at them. "Names?" She flicked a glance at the clipboard, noticing names that began with the letter S. Quick thinking spurred her to say, "Samantha and Robert Stevens." The guard scanned the list. Simone held her breath. They weren't on it, but maybe the guard wouldn't make a scene. Instead, he glared. "Not seeing that. Are you sure you're on the list?" Sandoval leaned forward, adopting a genial tone. "Actually, we might be under McClure's personal invites. Could you check with him directly?" The guard looked suspicious, but after a tense moment, he picked up his phone to call someone inside. While the guard spoke quietly on the phone, Simone angled her gaze through the iron bars of the gate. She glimpsed a cluster of high-end cars parked along the circular driveway: Mercedes, BMWs, and even a Tesla, a gathering of some of Greyfield's wealthiest elites, no doubt. If McClure was laundering money, bribing officials, or orchestrating corruption with local police, these were likely the same individuals who profited from those unethical deals. She overheard the guard mumble a description of them. Her pulse drummed, waiting for a definitive yes or no. Then, unexpectedly, the guard hung up, stepped aside, and opened the gate. "Fine," he said curtly. "Mr. McClure said to let you in." Simone and Sandoval exchanged a quick glance. This was too easy, a potential trap, or a sign that McClure suspected nothing. Or perhaps he recognized their arrival and wanted them inside for his own reasons. "Thank you," Simone said, feigning a relieved smile as they walked through. Halfway up the driveway, Sandoval whispered, "Be careful. If McClure wanted to keep us out, he would have." "We might be heading straight into the lion's den," Simone nodded. "At least we'll see what the lion is up to. Keep your eyes open for anything incriminating." As they neared the mansion's grand entrance, the sound of clinking glasses, subdued classical music, and murmured conversations spilled onto the wide marble steps. A server passed with a silver tray of champagne flutes, but Simone politely declined. She couldn't risk dulling her senses, not for a second. Inside, the mansion's interior was even more luxurious than expected. A towering crystal chandelier cast shimmering prisms of light across the polished floor. Guests in formal attire mingled, exchanging pleasantries and conspiratorial smiles. The air smelled of expensive perfume, aged whiskey, and subtle tension. Simone recognized the mayor of Greyfield near the fireplace, chatting with a man who looked like a state senator. Both men exuded the confident air of public figures who believed themselves untouchable. Sandoval scanned the crowd discreetly, searching for their host. "There," he whispered, inclining his head toward a tall man with slicked-back silver hair. Irving McClure stood by a grand piano, entertaining a small group with a practiced smile. He wore a tailored suit that seemed to advertise his wealth, while his sharp gaze occasionally swept the room as if appraising every individual's worth. Taking a measured breath, Simone guided Sandoval closer to that side of the room. Their plan was to blend in, gather intel, and see if McClure would drop any clues about his involvement with the police. But as soon as they neared, McClure broke off his conversation and locked eyes on Simone. She felt a chill of recognition pass between them. He gestured them over with a suave wave, a glass of whiskey in his other hand. "Well, well," he said in a smooth baritone, smiling in a way that didn't touch his eyes. "Welcome to my home." "I don't believe we've had the pleasure." Simone forced a gracious nod. "We've heard a lot about you, Mr. McClure. Thanks for inviting us in on such short notice." He took a leisurely sip of whiskey, eyes glinting with curiosity or suspicion, or both. "A friend of mine at the gate told me you weren't on the list, so I'm dying to know who recommended you." Sandoval cleared his throat, stepping forward with a practiced smirk. "We've been looking to invest in the area, and your name came up in all the right conversations," he said, spinning a story they'd devised in the car. "We couldn't pass up an opportunity to introduce ourselves." McClure tilted his head, measuring their words. Then a slow smile curled his lips. "Investors, are you? Well, Greyfield is always looking for fresh blood, but you'll find that it's a tight-knit community. People here prefer dealing with, let's say, trusted associates." Simone raised an eyebrow, playing along. Trust can be earned. She deliberately left the statement hanging, hoping McClure would fill the silence with something revealing. Before he could respond, a commotion by the doorway drew everyone's attention. A new arrival, Detective Ray Gaines, one of Greyfield's senior officers, stepped in. Simone recognized him from the background check she'd done. If there was corruption involving the upper echelons of the police department, Gaines was rumored to be near the center. The detective locked eyes with McClure and then flicked his gaze to Simone and Sandoval, suspicion sharpening his features. McClure's voice took on a silky undertone. "Why don't you enjoy yourselves? Have a drink. I need to speak with an old friend." He excused himself and moved swiftly to greet Detective Gaines, the two huddling in a corner near a grand staircase. Their hushed conversation was guarded, but McClure's occasional glance in Simone's direction betrayed his wariness. Sandoval leaned in, speaking near her ear. "We're definitely on their radar. This might be our chance to tail them, or at least eavesdrop on what they're saying." Simone nodded, heart hammering. "We have to be subtle. Let's mingle and inch closer." They navigated through clusters of Greyfield's elite, who eyed them with polite curiosity. Simone exchanged small talk with a local bank manager and a councilwoman, all while maintaining a peripheral watch on McClure and Detective Gaines. Whenever she managed to edge within earshot, they lowered their voices or shifted location. The cat and mouse game was on, and it reminded Simone of a complex waltz. One misstep could shatter their cover. Suddenly, McClure broke away, heading upstairs with Gaines trailing behind. Seeing an opening, Simone touched Sandoval's arm. "Let's try to follow at a distance." They slipped away from the main gathering, creeping up the sweeping staircase. The upper floor was quieter, the hum of conversation drifting from below like echoes in a distant chamber. At the end of a long hallway lined with expensive paintings, a door clicked shut. Simone crouched by the corner, straining to listen. Sandoval pressed a small device, a concealed microphone amplifier against the door's wooden panel. Through the faint crackle, they caught bits of hushed dialogue. "O'Connor messed up, got himself arrested. We need a plan to contain this. The feds are sniffing around." The mention of O'Connor made Simone's pulse spike. McClure's voice was tense. "If the Bureau's onto us, we shut this down. No more payoffs until we know exactly what they have." Gaines hissed, "We can't just leave O'Connor to rot. He might talk." McClure's reply came cold and decisive. "Then he needs a reason not to. Handle it." The floorboards creaked behind Simone. She froze, spinning around to find a figure looming, a heavy-set security guard with an expression that telegraphed immediate suspicion. "What are you doing up here?" he demanded, voice echoing in the hushed corridor. His posture suggested he was ready for a confrontation. Simone's mind raced. If they got caught eavesdropping, it could end in violence or at least blow their cover. Sandoval, ever the quick thinker, slipped his microphone amplifier into an inside pocket and half laughed, feigning tipsiness. "We got lost looking for the restroom. This place is huge." The guard didn't appear amused. He stepped closer, blocking the hallway. "I'll escort you back to the party," he growled, his hand drifting to a baton on his belt. Simone forced a disarming smile. "Thank you. That'd be great," she said, playing along as a slightly embarrassed guest. Her heart hammered as she wondered if the guard had heard the muffled conversation from behind the door. Sandoval and Simone followed the guard's lead, descending the staircase. She stole a fleeting glance back at the closed door at the end of the hall, wishing she had a chance to record more. But at least they had gleaned crucial intel. McClure and Detective Gaines were definitely linked to O'Connor's payoffs, and they were moving to cover their tracks. With O'Connor in custody, there was no telling how far they might go to silence him or Simone. Back in the main foyer, the guard abruptly said, "Enjoy the rest of your evening," his tone dripping with sarcasm. Simone and Sandoval parted ways, wandering among the oblivious partygoers to decide their next move. They had enough to suspect a major conspiracy. The question was how to convert suspicion into solid evidence. As the night wore on, the crowd thinned. A string quartet played a soft classical piece in a far corner, while staff circulated with trays of canapes. Simone and Sandoval quietly surveyed the guests, noting those who spoke with Detective Gaines or McClure. Each handshake, each hushed exchange could signify another cog in the corrupt machine. Eventually, they decided the risk of staying longer outweighed any potential reward. They'd gleaned enough to justify a deeper federal probe. Simone brushed past a row of expensive statues, heading for the exit. Just then, her phone buzzed a text from Agent Monroe back at the field office. It read, "O'Connor attacked by an unknown assailant in his cell. Condition critical. Possibly an inside job." Simone's stomach dropped. She grabbed Sandoval's arm, showing him the text. His face darkened with alarm. "They're trying to take him out," he muttered. "We have to move." Without bidding farewell, they slipped out of the mansion, hearts racing. The guard at the gate gave them a cool, suspicious look, but said nothing as they exited. Once back in their sedan, Sandoval floored the accelerator, heading straight for the county jail. Along the way, Simone's mind reeled with the implications. This was no longer just a matter of corruption. Someone was willing to commit murder, possibly to protect powerful secrets. 15 minutes later, they rushed into the jail's intake area, flashing their badges to get through. The smell of disinfectant and stale fear clung to the corridors. One of the duty officers, eyes wide with panic, directed them to the medical wing. "O'Connor was found unconscious," he stammered, voice quavering. "He's in bad shape." They hurried past rows of barred cells until they reached a small infirmary room where O'Connor lay on a cot. A paramedic was bent over him, checking vitals. His face was bruised and battered, an oxygen mask strapped to his mouth. Blood seeped through makeshift bandages on his ribs. A swirl of questions assaulted Simone's mind. Who had the motive and opportunity to do this? The simpler question, however, was, who didn't? Sandoval conferred with the paramedic. "Will he make it?" The paramedic responded quietly, "He's stable for now, but we need to get him to the hospital. There's internal bleeding." Simone glimpsed the flicker of consciousness in O'Connor's eyes as they loaded him onto a stretcher. She saw fear, confusion, perhaps even regret. The paramedic wheeled him out, lights flashing as the ambulance sped off into the night. Agent Monroe appeared moments later, face etched with worry. "Word is it was another inmate or maybe someone in uniform. They're not sure. Surveillance cameras had a technical malfunction." He arched an eyebrow in grim irony. "Convenient, huh?" Simone nodded, adrenaline still coursing. They wanted to silence him before he could talk. "Now, we might lose our best lead if he doesn't pull through." The rest of that night blurred into a flurry of phone calls, paperwork, and frantic strategizing. The Bureau demanded a full lockdown of the facility. Agents swarmed the jail, interviewing guards and inmates. The technical malfunction turned out to be more than a glitch. The camera system for the cell block had been manually powered down minutes before the attack. That pointed to an inside job, possibly orchestrated by the same network that financed O'Connor. Exhausted, Simone collapsed into a chair in the warden's office, her head throbbing. Sandoval was on the phone with the U.S. attorney, briefing her on the situation. A grim reality pressed in on them. If the conspirators could reach O'Connor inside a secured jail, they might be capable of targeting Simone or anyone else in the investigation. This was personal, and it was deadly. At sunrise, Simone finally left the jail. She stepped outside, the early morning light stinging her eyes. Agent Monroe caught up with her. "We're pulling in more resources," he said, a comforting hand on her shoulder. "U.S. Marshals might take over security for O'Connor once he's stabilized. If we keep him alive, he might flip." Nodding wearily, Simone glanced at the small crowd of reporters gathering at the perimeter, cameras flashing as they tried to glean any details about the scandal. News was spreading like wildfire. Perhaps public scrutiny would make it harder for the conspirators to operate in the shadows. Then again, it could also raise the stakes, driving them to even more desperate measures. The following day, Simone stood by O'Connor's hospital bed in a secure wing, guarded by 2 marshals. His face was swollen, eyes barely open, but he was conscious. A swirl of the fourth lines and medical machinery surrounded him, beeping softly. She approached, her expression unreadable. He coughed weakly. His voice rasped out in a strained whisper. "What are you doing here?" She hesitated. Despite his crimes and his nearly fatal assault on her, she also saw a man caught in a tangled web. And whether she liked it or not, he held the key to unraveling it. "You were attacked," she stated quietly. "They tried to kill you to keep you quiet, but you're still alive. This is your chance to do something right." A single tear slid down the side of his bruised face. Whether from pain, shame, or both, Simone couldn't say. He swallowed, voice trembling. McClure, he paid me, paid others too, the mayor, the chief, Gaines, all on the payroll. He paused, coughing violently. They said, if I kept people like you off their backs, I'd make a fortune. Simone's heart pounded. Here it was, the confession that could crack Greyfield's corrupt circle wide open. She gently urged him to continue. Travis, I need names. Specific transactions. Anything that can help us build a case. Can you trust me enough to do that? His eyes fluttered, pain etched into every line of his face. He nodded, too weak to speak more. Simone glanced back at the marshals, who hovered protectively. Hang in there, she whispered. I'll make sure you're safe. As she stepped out into the corridor, she mentally listed the next steps, gather O'Connor's statement formally, link it to bank records, and then move on McClure, Gaines, and whoever else was implicated. Justice was within reach. By the end of the week, the FBI had compiled enough probable cause to secure arrest warrants against Detective Gaines, the police chief, and Mayor Jenkins, all of whom had received sizable deposits from McClure's shell companies. More agents rolled into Greyfield, setting up a makeshift command center in the county courthouse. Tensions soared as rumors spread that half the police department might be on the take. Officers loyal to the chief tried to block the arrests, but the sheer force of federal authority prevailed. Simone watched events unfold with an odd mixture of relief and lingering anger. The memory of O'Connor's gun aimed at her, his laughter ringing in her ears, refused to fade. But that moment, when he ended up in cuffs, had been the catalyst for change. True, the journey had been harrowing and dangerous, but it brought them to a place where real accountability could happen. Arresting crooked officials was one step, but rebuilding trust in law enforcement in Greyfield would take far longer. The culminating moment came when Irving McClure himself was taken into federal custody. Agents raided his mansion at dawn, seizing documents, computers, and account ledgers. McClure tried to appear composed, insisting to reporters that he was innocent and would be cleared of all charges. Yet the look in his eyes suggested he knew his empire was crumbling. The FBI found reams of evidence linking him to bribes, money laundering, and orchestrated violence through complicit officers like O'Connor. Standing outside the mansion's gates, Simone felt a sense of closure wash over her. She remembered the first time she'd driven into Greyfield, uncertain and uneasy, never expecting to uproot an entire network of corruption. And now, in front of these opulent gates, it all came full circle. In the weeks that followed, trials were set, and Greyfield's political structure underwent a massive upheaval. Simone testified at preliminary hearings, her calm and precise recounting of O'Connor's assault leaving the courtroom in hushed astonishment. Jurors and spectators alike were riveted by how quickly a single traffic stop had escalated into a moment of life and death, and how that moment exposed a sprawling conspiracy. For her part, Simone felt a mix of pride and residual trauma. She'd always believed in the mission of the FBI to protect and uphold the law, yet the ordeal underscored how some individuals hide behind badges for their own gain. The fiasco in Greyfield would serve as a case study in departmental reform for years to come. O'Connor, recovering from his injuries, ultimately took a plea deal. He provided the final pieces of evidence needed to convict McClure and several high-ranking officials. Some speculated O'Connor's decision was motivated partly by revenge. He'd realized they'd tried to eliminate him, the same way they'd tried to muzzle other threats. In the end, he faced serious prison time, but it was reduced in exchange for his testimony. As the dust settled, Simone headed back to her office, where commendations awaited her. She felt no triumph in seeing O'Connor's downfall, only a sense of justice. He had reaped what he'd sown, falling victim to the very system of corruption he'd eagerly served. On the morning of her departure, Simone took one last drive through Greyfield. With the arrests made, the small town breathed a subdued sigh of relief. Some shops hung banners reading "Thank you, FBI" in their windows, while citizens cautiously hoped for a future free of bribe-fueled policing. She dropped by Flo's kitchen for those famous hash browns, finding them every bit as good as the rumors. The waitress, recognizing Simone from the local news coverage, gave her a grateful nod. "Thank you for cleaning up this mess," she said softly. Outside, the horizon stretched wide, bathed in the early sunlight that glinted off the dusty roads. Simone felt a pang of sadness for a community that had been betrayed by those sworn to protect it. But she also felt hope. Truth had seen the light of day, and wrongdoing was being held accountable. That was the essence of her duty, and the essence of karmic retribution. She turned onto the highway, heading back to the city, back to the everyday bustle of the FBI's world. In the rearview mirror, Greyfield's water tower receded into the distance, a silent monument to how quickly a single, tense moment can alter the course of an entire town. That moment when a cop pulled a gun on a black woman and laughed at her FBI badge proved to be his undoing. Within minutes, he was the one in handcuffs, marking the beginning of the end for a network of corruption that might otherwise have thrived. Though Simone's mind still played out the confrontation in flashes, his sneering grin, the cold metal of his gun, she found peace in the outcome. Justice had prevailed, and sometimes that was enough to keep her faith in the system she served. Thank you for watching this thrilling saga of corruption, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. From a tense confrontation on a lonely road to the sweeping takedown of an entire bribery ring, this story proves that truth can emerge even in the darkest corners. If you found yourself on the edge of your seat, don't forget to show your support. Hit that like button and share this video with others who love a dramatic twist of fate. And if you can't wait for more riveting accounts of justice served, subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. Stay tuned for more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us that integrity can triumph against all odds.